Ever catch yourself scrolling through endless motivational content, consuming quote after quote, video after video, book after book, yet still feeling the crushing weight of inaction? That peculiar sense of being simultaneously inspired and paralyzed? You sit there, mind temporarily lifted by someone else's words, feeling that brief surge of possibility, only to find yourself, hours later, in exactly the same position, inspired but unmoved, enlightened but unchanged. What if I told you that this endless search for motivation is not just ineffective, but is actively keeping you trapped in a cycle of mediocrity and unfulfillment? That the very concept of needing motivation is a modern illusion designed to keep you dependent, distracted, and ultimately dormant? I want to show why Nietzsche, perhaps history's most unflinchingly honest philosopher, would view our contemporary obsession with motivation as nothing more than a symptom of a deeper spiritual sickness, and why what you truly need is not another inspiring quote, but a fundamental awakening to the reality of your existence. This isn't about feeling good. This isn't about temporary inspiration. This is about confronting the uncomfortable truth that has been hiding behind your endless quest for motivation. A truth that, once recognized, will make the very concept of needing motivation seem as absurd as it is unnecessary. We live in an unprecedented age of motivational content. Inspirational videos, morning routines, success stories, productivity hacks, an entire industry built around the promise of finding that perfect mental state that will finally propel you toward your goals. What happens when you consume this content? A temporary high. A brief moment when anything seems possible. The intoxicating sensation that transformation is just around the corner. And then what? How quickly does that sensation fade? How rapidly does reality reassert itself? How soon do you find yourself seeking the next motivational fix? The pattern emerges, keeping you stuck in a state of perpetual mediocrity. Because here's what happens physiologically when you consume motivational content. Your brain receives a small dopamine reward, the same neurochemical released during other forms of consumption. You feel good momentarily. You mistake this feeling for progress, but no actual movement has occurred. No reality has changed. You've simply given yourself an emotional treat that demands nothing in return. And in that moment of false satisfaction, you've participated in your own pacification. The architects of distraction understand this mechanism perfectly. They've created an endless stream of empowering content that provides the sensation of growth without its substance. They've constructed a perfect system where feeling inspired substitutes for being transformed. They profit from your continued search for the motivation that never quite lasts, never quite transforms. But what if the entire premise is flawed? What if motivation itself is not what you've been missing? What if your endless search for the right emotional state is precisely what's preventing you from the awakening you actually need? Nietzsche, writing in the 19th century, foresaw our current predicament with devastating accuracy. He understood that modern humanity would increasingly mistake comfortable feelings for meaningful existence. In his masterwork, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche introduced the concept of the last man, the human being who seeks above all else comfort, safety, and pleasant experiences. The last man asks not how can I become more, but rather how can I feel better about what I already am. This is the hidden foundation of our motivation industry. It does not exist to transform you, but to comfort you, to make you feel good about seeking without finding, desiring without doing, dreaming without becoming. Nietzsche wrote, "The essence of all great love is that it demands the impossible. It wants to create a new value." Yet our motivation culture demands nothing impossible from you. It asks only that you consume more content, feel temporarily uplifted, and return when that feeling fades. What Nietzsche understood with painful clarity is that transformation never comes from pleasant states. It emerges from what he called the great pain, the willingness to confront the uncomfortable truths of our existence. And what is the most uncomfortable truth? That you already possess everything required for action, that your search for motivation is itself a form of avoidance, that you don't need to feel ready to begin, that waiting for the right emotional state is the surest path to a life of unfulfilled potential. Nietzsche challenged, The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. To be your own man is hard business. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened, but no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. This is the awakening I'm speaking of, not a pleasant motivational high, but the stark recognition that your life is happening now, with or without your perfect emotional state. That action precedes motivation, not the other way around. That waiting to feel ready is the most sophisticated form of self-deception. I want you to consider this. Who appears more alive to you? The person who acts only when feeling inspired, or the person who acts regardless of emotional weather? The answer reveals everything about how we've confused psychological comfort with actual living. There's a profound psychological principle here that the motivation industry actively suppresses. Motivation is not the precursor to action, but its consequence. This principle operates across every domain of human experience. The writer who waits for inspiration finds it appears mysteriously once the first page is written. The athlete who waits to feel energized discovers energy surging only after the workout has begun. The entrepreneur who waits for certainty realizes clarity emerges only after decisions are made. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote, "The doer alone learneth." Action precedes clarity, energy, and yes, motivation itself. Consider the most accomplished individuals throughout history. Did they possess some secret reservoir of motivation unavailable to you? Did they discover the perfect morning routine, the ultimate productivity hack, the most inspiring mentor? Or did they simply understand what Nietzsche articulated? He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. They commanded themselves to act before feeling ready, before feeling motivated, before feeling certain. The truly awake understand this. Waiting for motivation is abdicating sovereignty over your own existence. What you interpret as lack of motivation is actually something far more fundamental. A lack of acceptance that discomfort is the necessary price of a meaningful life. The awakened individual does not avoid this discomfort or seek to replace it with inspirational bypassing. They embrace it as the very sensation of growth itself. How do we translate this philosophy into practice? How do we move from motivation dependency to the awakened state Nietzsche envisioned? First, recognize that your resistance to action without motivation is not a personal failing, but a predictable result of our comfort-optimized culture. Nietzsche observed, "In individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule." The insanity of our epoch is believing that meaningful action should feel good before it begins. Second, understand that discomfort is not a signal to stop, but a signal of significance. Nietzsche put it bluntly, "What does not destroy me makes me stronger." The discomfort you feel when acting without perfect emotional alignment is the sensation of your comfort zone expanding, your character developing, your will strengthening. Third, implement the practice of the decisive moment. When faced with resistance, count down from 5 and move physically at 0. This practice, while simple, is revolutionary because it acknowledges the truth that Nietzsche understood. The body, once in motion, brings the mind along with it. This doesn't mean you never experience motivation, but in the awakened state, motivation becomes the companion of action rather than its prerequisite. When you act first, authentic motivation, the kind that sustains rather than merely initiates, naturally follows. Fourth, develop what Nietzsche called amor fati, the love of fate. This means embracing the full spectrum of human experience, including the discomfort of acting without pre-existing inspiration. When you no longer need to feel good to do good, you've achieved a level of freedom that the motivation dependent cannot comprehend. Begin with small actions. When you feel resistance to a necessary task, move physically toward it without internal debate. Make this your practice not occasionally but daily. Recognize the voice that says, "I don't feel motivated," not as truth, but as what Nietzsche would call a temptation. The temptation to remain comfortable rather than become consequential. As you practice action without pre-required motivation, something profound begins to happen. What Nietzsche called your will to power Your fundamental drive to overcome resistance and express your capabilities strengthens with each decisive movement. You begin to experience what Nietzsche described as becoming the one you are, not through endless self-analysis or emotional preparation, but through consistent action that shapes you from the outside in. Nietzsche wrote, "I am not a man, I am dynamite." He understood that human potential is not realized through comfortable introspection, but through explosive action that reshapes both the self and the world. This is the path to what he called the Übermensch or Superman, not a physical superior, but an individual who has transcended the need for comforting illusions and embraced the creative power of their own will. Remember, the world is designed to keep you comfortable, distracted, and ultimately insignificant. Every algorithm, every entertainment option, every motivational piece of content serves to maintain you in a state of comfortable inaction, feeling good about potential never realized. But you are not obligated to participate in this machinery of mediocrity. When you embrace action without motivational prerequisites, you're making the most radical statement possible in our comfort-obsessed culture. My life's meaning is more important than my momentary emotional state. This is the stance that generates not the fleeting high of motivational content, but the sustainable power that Nietzsche called the spirit of the lion, the ability to say a sacred no to comfort and a sacred yes to becoming. I want you to identify something important that you've been postponing until you feel motivated, something meaningful that remains undone not because you lack capability, but because you lack the perfect emotional state. Now, I challenge you to approach this task differently, not with the expectation of feeling good before beginning, but with the understanding that meaningful action often begins in emotional neutrality or even resistance. Set a specific time today, not tomorrow, not someday, when you will take the first physical step toward this task. When that moment comes, use the 5-second rule. Count backward from 5, and at 0, move your body toward action without internal negotiation. Notice what happens. Does the dreaded discomfort destroy you, or do you survive it? Does motivation magically appear once you're in motion? Does the anticipation of discomfort prove worse than the discomfort itself? The mastery of action without prerequisite motivation is not achieved overnight. It's a practice, a discipline, a way of being that develops over time. As you embrace this practice, you'll begin experiencing a form of power that motivation-dependent individuals cannot comprehend. You'll find yourself accomplishing not through emotional manipulation, but through the direct application of will. You'll discover that waiting to feel good before acting was the primary obstacle between you and the life you claim to want. Nietzsche wrote, "The secret of reaping the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment from life is to live dangerously." There is nothing more dangerous to mediocrity, to complacency, to unfulfilled potential than the decision to act without emotional preparation. So ask yourself this: how much longer are you willing to wait for the right moment? How many more days will you trade for the illusion of readiness? Because the truth is, nothing changes until you do. Not when you feel like it, but when you decide. And the ones who dare to act without permission from their emotions, they're the ones who break free. They're the ones who stop chasing motivation and start building momentum. If that hit you on a deeper level, tell me in the comments. What's one thing you've been postponing while waiting to feel ready? Your clarity might be exactly what someone else needs to see. Rewatch this when the hesitation creeps back in. Your clarity might be exactly what someone else needs to see. And remember Nietzsche's most enduring wisdom: become who you are.